Charlotte Zeller barely had time to react before the clinic doors burst open, slamming against the walls with a loud thud. A man rushed inside, his face pale with panic, cradling a trembling golden retriever in his arms. "Please, someone help him." His voice was deep, raw with desperation. Charlotte immediately stepped forward, her training kicking in. "I've got him," she said gently, reaching out for the dog. "What happened?" The man's hands shook as he handed over the retriever. I don't know, he just collapsed on the floor and wouldn't get up." His green eyes were wild with fear, his dark brown hair disheveled as if he had run his hands through it 100 times. He looked like a man who wasn't used to feeling helpless. Charlotte pressed her fingers to the dog's side, feeling for his pulse. "We'll take care of him. What's his name?" "Bear," the man said, his voice breaking slightly. She nodded. "Okay, Bear, you're in good hands." Charlotte disappeared into the back, her heart pounding as she and the vet worked swiftly. After a tense examination, they determined Bear had a low blood sugar episode. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to scare any owner. They administered fluids and monitored him closely. 20 minutes later, Charlotte returned to the waiting room where the man was pacing like a caged animal. The second he saw her, he stopped, his eyes searching her face. "Is he?" "He's stable," Charlotte reassured him with a warm smile. "It looks like a drop in blood sugar. We're monitoring him, but he's already perking up." The man exhaled sharply, as if he had been holding his breath for eternity. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with relief. Charlotte studied him more closely now that the immediate crisis had passed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp button-down that was now wrinkled from his frantic movements. His watch was sleek, expensive-looking, and there was something about him, his posture, his presence, that hinted at wealth. But she had met enough worried pet owners to know that, in moments like these, money didn't matter. Love did. "Would you like to sit with him for a while?" she offered. The man hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I would." She led him to the back where Bear lay on a cushioned mat, his tail wagging weakly. The man dropped to his knees beside the dog, stroking his head with a tenderness that made Charlotte's chest tighten. "You scared me, buddy," he murmured. Charlotte crouched beside them, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through her. "He's going to be okay," she reassured. "Just make sure he eats regularly and we'll give you some supplements to help." The man looked up at her then, and for the first time his panic had faded, replaced by something softer. "I don't even know your name," he admitted. She smiled. Charlotte Zeller." His lips curved slightly. "Everett Vaughn." The name itched at the back of her mind, familiar somehow, but she couldn't place it. "Nice to meet you, Everett," she said. And for some reason, even in the middle of an emergency, it felt like the beginning of something. Charlotte leaned against the examination table, watching as Everett ran his fingers through Bear's fur. The golden retriever had perked up considerably, his tail thumping lazily against the floor as if he knew he had given his owner a scare. "You must really love him," Charlotte observed, adjusting the chart in her hands. Everett let out a breath, his shoulders finally losing some of their tension. "He's been with me since he was a puppy. He's family." His voice was steady now, but Charlotte could still hear traces of the fear that had gripped him earlier. She softened. "He's lucky to have you." Everett's eyes flicked to her then, something unreadable passing across his face before he glanced back at Bear. "I think I'm the lucky one," he admitted. For a moment, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the steady hum of the clinic's equipment in the background. Charlotte had met plenty of pet owners who cared deeply for their animals, but there was something about the way Everett looked at Bear that struck a chord in her. She cleared her throat, glancing down at the file. "We'll want to do a follow-up in a few days, just to be safe." "I can schedule that for you now." Everett straightened, his gaze locking onto hers. "I'd appreciate that." Charlotte walked over to the reception desk and entered the appointment into the system. When she turned back, Everett was watching her closely, as if studying her. "Do you work here full-time?" he asked. She nodded. 5 days a week plus the occasional emergency shift." "That must be exhausting," she shrugged. "It's worth it." Animals don't fake how they feel. When they're happy, you know it. When they're scared, you can help them. It's honest. Everett's lips parted slightly as if caught off guard by her answer. That's a good way to look at it. Charlotte tilted her head. What do you do? For the briefest moment, hesitation flickered across his face, but it was gone before she could analyze it. I run a business, he said vaguely. She arched an eyebrow. That's a broad answer. He chuckled, the sound rich and smooth. It's complicated. Charlotte didn't push. People had all kinds of jobs, and if he didn't want to go into detail, that was his choice. Everett glanced down at Bear, then back at her. Would it be strange if I said I wanted to thank you properly? She frowned. You don't have to thank me, it's my job. That doesn't mean I shouldn't, he hesitated, then added, dinner. Charlotte blinked. Dinner. A thank you dinner, he clarified. No pressure, just a meal, my way of showing appreciation. She studied him, trying to decide if this was just gratitude or something else entirely. There was an undeniable energy between them, something unspoken but thick in the air. That's really not necessary, she said, though her pulse betrayed her calm exterior. Everett leaned slightly forward, resting his hands on the counter. I'd like to anyway, Charlotte hesitated. She wasn't the type to accept invitations from clients, but Everett didn't feel like just another pet owner. Before she could overthink it, she exhaled. All right, one dinner. His lips curved, not quite a smile, but something close. One dinner. Bear let out a content sigh at their feet, and for some reason, it felt like a silent approval. Charlotte stepped out of the taxi and onto the cobblestone entrance of the restaurant, glancing up at the towering glass facade. The place exuded quiet luxury, warm lighting spilling onto the sidewalk, a sleek black awning with gold lettering, and a doorman in a crisp suit holding the entrance open. She hesitated for the briefest moment. This was far beyond anything she had expected when Everett had mentioned dinner. She had assumed a casual bistro or a neighborhood cafe. This was the kind of place where the wine list was thicker than a novel, and the air hummed with the quiet conversations of people who didn't need to check the prices before ordering. Everett was already waiting inside, standing near the host's podium. He looked effortless, yet precise, his dark navy suit tailored to perfection, the open collar of his shirt hinting at an ease that somehow made him even more magnetic. When he saw her, something flickered in his expression: approval, maybe even a touch of surprise. You came, he said, stepping forward. Charlotte nodded, pushing down the sudden awareness of just how different their worlds seemed in this moment. I said I would. Everett's lips quirked slightly, and he gestured toward the maitre d'. Within seconds, they were being led through the softly lit dining room, past tables adorned with flickering candles and crystal stemware. A quiet murmur of conversation filled the space, the kind of atmosphere where every word felt like it held weight. Their table was by the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Charlotte eased into the plush chair, smoothing her napkin over her lap as Everett settled across from her. Is this your way of making sure I never forget this dinner? She asked, glancing around. Everett leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. I wanted to thank you properly. Charlotte studied him, wondering not for the first time who exactly he was outside of being Bear's devoted owner. You do this often? She asked. He tilted his head. Show appreciation? Yes. But taking a veterinary nurse to dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city? No. Charlotte felt a warmth creep up her neck but masked it by reaching for her water glass. I appreciate the honesty. Everett watched her for a beat before shifting his attention to the menu. Order whatever you'd like. She scanned the options and bit back a laugh. Pretty sure I can't even pronounce half of these dishes. Everett's mouth twitched. Then let me make a recommendation. He ordered with the ease of someone who had done this countless times before, selecting a wine that the sommelier nodded at approvingly. When the waiter disappeared, Charlotte rested her elbows lightly on the table. You said you run a business, she said. That's still pretty vague. Everett exhaled as if debating how much to reveal. I own a few companies, investments, real estate, technology. That explained the restaurant, the suit, the quiet confidence. It also explained why his name had felt familiar when he'd first introduced himself. She had probably seen it in a headline somewhere without realizing it. "So you're a millionaire," she said, testing the words. He didn't flinch. "Does that change anything?" Charlotte considered the question. "No," she admitted, "but it does explain a lot." Everett's expression shifted, something unreadable passing through his gaze. "And what about you? How did you end up working with animals?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "I've always loved them. I wanted to be a vet, but the cost of school was a lot, so I became a veterinary nurse instead. I still get to do what I love, just in a different way." Everett studied her, his expression thoughtful. "You don't regret it?" Charlotte shook her head. "Not for a second." The waiter returned with their wine, pouring a deep red into their glasses. Everett lifted his, watching her intently. "To unexpected meetings." Charlotte met his gaze and clinked her glass against his. "To bear," she added. Everett chuckled, and for the first time that evening, the tension that had been lingering between them shifted into something lighter. As the night unfolded, conversation flowed effortlessly. Charlotte found herself laughing more than she expected, drawn into Everett's dry humor and sharp wit. He asked questions, real ones, not just polite inquiries, but ones that made her think. And he listened, truly listened, in a way that made her feel like she was the only person in the room. When the plates were cleared and the last sip of wine was taken, Everett leaned forward slightly. "I enjoyed this," Charlotte nodded. "Me too." His gaze lingered on her for a moment before he signaled for the check, but when the bill arrived, he didn't even glance at it, just slipped his card onto the tray without hesitation. Outside, the air was crisp, the city alive with the hum of traffic and laughter from nearby bars. Everett turned to her, hands in his pockets. "Let me take you home." Charlotte hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because something about this night felt like it was shifting into dangerous territory. "Everett." She started. He stepped closer, his voice low. "No expectations, just making sure you get home safely." Charlotte exhaled, then nodded. "All right." He led her to a sleek black car waiting at the curb, the driver already holding the door open. As she slid into the seat, she felt the weight of Everett's presence beside her, the space between them charged with something unspoken. As the city lights blurred past, Charlotte stole a glance at him. She had walked into this evening thinking it was just a thank-you dinner. But now, as she sat beside a man who was far more than he first appeared, she realized something else entirely. This wasn't just dinner. This was the beginning of something she wasn't sure she was ready for. The car rolled to a stop in front of Charlotte's apartment building, the soft hum of the engine fading into the quiet night. Everett stepped out first, rounding the vehicle to open her door before she could even reach for the handle. The gesture was smooth, effortless, as if ingrained in him. Charlotte hesitated for half a second before taking his offered hand, the warmth of his palm sending an unexpected shiver through her. As she stepped onto the pavement, Everett didn't immediately let go. His fingers lingered around hers, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin before he slowly released her. The air between them felt charged, the kind of tension that didn't need words. Everett looked up at the brick facade of her building, then back at her. "You sure you're okay going in alone?" Charlotte exhaled a soft laugh. "I've made it this far in life without an escort." His lips twitched, but his eyes held something more serious. "That doesn't mean I can't want to stay." The words sent her pulse into a staccato rhythm, and for a moment, all she could do was hold his gaze. There was something about Everett, the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, that made it impossible to dismiss him as just another fleeting presence in her life. She swallowed. "Everett, I know," he said, cutting her off gently. "You weren't expecting any of this." "Neither was I." Charlotte glanced down, grounding herself. "It's just, my life is simple, steady, and you." She let out a breath, looking back up at him. "You don't seem like someone who does steady." Everett tilted his head slightly, studying her. "What if I want to be?" Her heart stuttered. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Charlotte, I don't do things halfway. I don't waste time on things I don't care about." His voice was lower now, more certain. "And I care about this." Charlotte knew she should say something, anything, but words felt impossible, because the truth was, she cared too, more than she wanted to admit. Everett's gaze flickered downward for a fraction of a second before returning to hers. "If you tell me to walk away, I will. No questions, no pressure, but if there's even a part of you that wants to see where this goes." He exhaled slowly. "Then let me." Charlotte felt the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. She had spent so much of her life being practical, making choices that made sense. But nothing about Everett Vaughn made sense, and yet she wanted him anyway. She inhaled, steadying herself. "Okay." Everett's eyes darkened, a slow satisfaction spreading across his face. "Okay," she nodded. "Let's see where this goes." For the first time that night, Everett smiled fully, no restraint, no careful control, and it was devastating. Charlotte barely had time to process it before he reached up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear with a touch so light it sent a current through her entire body. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said, voice softer now. Charlotte nodded, unable to do anything but watch as he stepped back toward the car. Just before he slid inside, he glanced at her one last time, and then he was gone. Charlotte stood there for a long moment, the city quiet around her, her heart still pounding against her ribs. She had no idea what she had just agreed to, but for the first time in a long time she didn't care. Charlotte didn't have to wait long for Everett to keep his word. The next evening, just as she was leaving the clinic, her phone buzzed. "I'm outside," was all his message said. She hesitated for only a second before stepping outside, where a sleek black car idled at the curb. Everett leaned against it, dressed in a dark coat that made him look effortlessly powerful against the glow of the streetlights. He straightened when he saw her, his gaze sweeping over her as if making sure she was really there. "Rough day," Charlotte sighed, rolling her shoulders. "Just long." Everett opened the car door. "Then let's fix that." She slid inside and he followed, the door closing with a soft click. The interior was quiet, cocooned from the city noise. As the car eased into motion, she turned to him. "Where are we going?" Everett's lips curved slightly. "You'll see." The ride was smooth, the city lights flashing past in a blur. Charlotte watched him out of the corner of her eye. He was relaxed, one arm draped across the seat, but there was something in his expression like he was waiting for her to ask something. Instead, she let the silence stretch, letting herself settle into the moment. It wasn't until they pulled up to a private rooftop terrace that she turned to him with an arched brow. "This is your idea of casual," Everett chuckled as he stepped out and offered her his hand. "I never said I did casual." She took his hand, allowing him to lead her up the stairs and onto the terrace. The space was stunning, soft lights strung overhead, a table set for two, and a view of the city that took her breath away. Charlotte folded her arms, tilting her head at him. "So what's the occasion?" Everett leaned against the railing, watching her with quiet amusement. "No occasion, just wanted to see you." Something warm settled in her chest. "You don't do things halfway, do you?" His expression turned serious. "Not when it matters." The words sent a ripple through her, but before she could dwell on it, a waiter appeared, pouring wine into their glasses. The evening unfolded with ease, conversation flowing as naturally as the city breeze. Charlotte found herself relaxing, laughing more than she had in weeks. Everett had a way of making the world feel smaller, quieter, like nothing existed beyond this rooftop. When dinner was finished and the plates were cleared, Everett leaned back, studying her. "Tell me something I don't know about you," she considered. "I used to ride horses." His brows lifted. "Really?" she nodded. "When I was younger, I worked at a stable in exchange for lessons, loved it." Everett's gaze lingered on her. "Why'd you stop?" Charlotte hesitated. "Life got in the way." He was quiet for a moment before he said, "Maybe life should make room for the things you love." She looked at him then, realizing how easily he said things that made her rethink everything. Everett reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He placed it in front of her without a word. Her pulse jumped. "What is this?" "Open it." She hesitated before flipping the lid. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, a small charm in the shape of a horse dangling from the chain. Charlotte stared at it, something tight forming in her throat. "Everett, this is a reminder," he said softly, "that some things are worth holding on to." She swallowed hard, not sure how to process the way her chest ached at the gesture. Everett reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that I meant it." Charlotte exhaled, looking down at their joined hands. She had stepped into this thinking she knew what she was getting into. But Everett Vaughn was proving, time and time again, that she had no idea. Charlotte ran her fingers over the delicate charm bracelet as she lay in bed that night, the weight of Everett's words still pressing against her chest. She had never been the type to get swept up in grand gestures, but this was different. It wasn't just expensive, it was thoughtful, personal. How had he managed to see a part of her she'd nearly forgotten about? Sleep didn't come easily, but when she finally drifted off, Everett was the last thing on her mind. The next few days passed in a blur of clinic work and late-night phone calls with him. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was willing to give, but each conversation only deepened the pull between them. It was impossible to ignore. By the end of the week, Everett sent a car for her again, this time with no explanation. When she arrived at the address he had given her, her breath caught. It wasn't a restaurant or a rooftop terrace this time. It was a sprawling equestrian estate on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a movie. Everett was waiting by the stables, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, dark jeans, sleeves rolled up, boots scuffed just enough to suggest he wasn't a stranger to this place. "You said you used to ride," he said, watching her reaction carefully. Charlotte's chest tightened. "I did." "Then let's fix that," Everett said, leading her inside. The scent of hay and leather filled the air as they stepped into the stable. A sleek black horse stood in one of the stalls, ears flicking forward as they approached. "This is Shadow," Everett introduced. "She's gentle, but she's got spirit." Charlotte reached out instinctively, running her hand down the horse's neck. Shadow huffed softly, leaning into her touch. The familiarity of it sent a rush of warmth through her. "You did this for me?" she asked, turning back to him. Everett's expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady. "I wanted to give you back something you loved." Charlotte swallowed against the lump in her throat. No one had ever done something like this for her before, not because they had to, just because they wanted to. "Ride with me," Everett said, stepping closer. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. Minutes later, they were out in the open fields, the rhythmic sound of hooves against the grass filling the evening air. Charlotte felt the wind rush past her, the familiar exhilaration of riding flooding back. Everett rode beside her, his presence steady, effortless. He wasn't just a man who thrived in boardrooms and luxury, he belonged here too, in the open air, where control wasn't dictated by money but by trust. "You're a natural," Everett observed as they slowed their pace. Charlotte laughed, breathless. "I almost forgot how much I missed this." Everett's gaze didn't leave her. "I don't want you to forget." She met his eyes, something shifting between them, deeper than before. They rode until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. When they finally returned to the stables, Charlotte felt lighter, freer, like a part of herself had been restored. As she dismounted, Everett reached for her, steadying her before she could protest. His hands rested on her waist, firm but not demanding. "Everett," she whispered, her pulse hammering. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, his voice low. "I just need you to know I'm all in, Charlotte." Her breath caught. She had spent so long fearing what it would mean to let someone in, to take a risk on something that could fall apart. But with Everett, it didn't feel like a risk. It felt inevitable. She didn't think. She just reached up, threading her fingers into his hair as she pulled him down into a kiss. It was slow at first, tentative, but the moment his arms tightened around her, everything else faded. The world shrank to just the two of them, to the way he kissed her like she was the only thing that had ever mattered. When they finally pulled apart, Everett rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me this is real," he murmured. Charlotte smiled, breathless. "It's real." And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. Months passed, each one weaving Everett deeper into her life. He never tried to change her world, he simply fit into it, making space for her in his own. One evening, he took her back to the rooftop terrace where it had all begun. But this time, there was no dinner set up. Just a single velvet box resting on the table. Charlotte's heart pounded as Everett took her hands, his green eyes holding an intensity that made her knees weak. "I never expected you, Charlotte," he said. "But now I can't imagine my life without you." He dropped to one knee, flipping open the box to reveal a ring that sparkled under the city lights. "Marry me," Everett said, his voice unwavering. "Not because it's the next step, not because of anything but this. I love you, and I want forever with you." Charlotte's throat tightened, emotions crashing over her in waves. There was no hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." Everett exhaled sharply before surging to his feet, capturing her mouth in a kiss that sealed everything between them. That night, under the city skyline, Charlotte knew one thing with absolute certainty. She hadn't just fallen in love with Everett Vaughn, she had found home.